I want to, again, introduce myself. My name is Tom, and I'm developer relations here at Lightrun with developer observability startup, which you'll hear quite a lot about today during Vlad's demonstration. With me today are Shai Almog, our developer advocate for the JVM. Hi, Shai. Say hi. Hello. Hello.
Hi.
And Vladimir, world-renowned super chef, super Java champion. When I say
super
chef, you're not a chef. That's not a thing. Like, it's not. Why did I say chef?
I could be a chef.
You could be a chef. You're a Java chef. You're chopping the objects away. So the way this thing is going to run today is as follows. We'll do a little bit of housekeeping in a moment where we'll talk about what we're going to do, some logistics and other fun stuff. Once we're done with that, that will include some introduction and some other logistics that we have to run. Shai is going to walk you through a very, very brief installation and configuration of the Lightrun platform with the application Vlad is going to run today. Then Vlad will start the presentation. And by all means, please, this presentation is meant to be interactive. There's a button right here on the bottom called Q&A. You can just click it, and then there will be a box where you can add questions. You can ask whatever you want to ask. When you ask them, I will raise the questions to Vlad as they come along. It's okay. Please disrupt us because there's a bunch of things we're going to cover today. All of this information will be covered as part of the recording that we will send you. We'll also send a list of all the questions and answers that were asked, so you will have that as well for reference. So that would be pretty cool if you ask questions. Anything other than that I wanted to mention? Oh, at the very end, we might go a bit over, just a tiny bit over, not too much, 5 or 10 minutes over the hour. We went over the content before we jumped on the session. There's a bit more to cover than just an hour. So excuse us if you want to drop. But again, there will be a recording that will be sent to you after the session. All right. Let's get this show on the road. Let's do a small brief round of introductions for kind of a deeper note. Tom, I was a site reliability engineer before I joined the developer relations team at Lightrun. I love systems. I write systems, I play with systems, I orchestrate systems. That's what I do. And here at Lightrun, I do talk and write and other DevRel stuff about developer observability. Shai, do you want to introduce yourself a tiny bit?
So I'm Shai Almog, and I've been a developer for practically ever, and been using Java since the first beta. I was a consultant for kind of a decade, and that's kind of gets you into all sorts of things. So I worked with over 100 companies, worked for Sun Microsystems for a bit over a decade, in terms of databases, which is what we're going to talk about today. I worked with Entity Beans 1.0 and stuff like that. That's really ancient, all the way up to today. I was the first non-founder developer at Lightrun, so I literally wrote a lot of the stuff that you would see here. And then I became developer advocate a few months ago. Also founded a couple of companies, wrote lots of open source stuff, wrote books, blogs, you name it.
Codename One. Codename One.
That's the big open source stuff, but yeah.
All right, Shai, thank you very much. Vlad, do you actually need an introduction? Or I think everyone here knows you, but let's do it anyways.
Let's do it anyways. Okay, so my name is Vladimir. I'm basically an independent consultant nowadays. I used to work for Red Hat on the Hibernate project. People got to know me from when I was doing that as well. I blog every weekly. I like to write a blog about not just about Hibernate database and interesting stuff that I find. And sometimes I answer questions on Stack Overflow. I run some open source projects related to Hibernate, the Hibernate types project, which tries to add some stuff that's not available in the core. And that's basically it. And today I would like to share some things which I found over the years, and I think that they are very important to know better.
I can tell you that I've been doing before there was JPA, been doing object relational and object-oriented databases, and I still learn a lot from your blog and from the information that you put out. Despite, I wrote a JVM, and I still have a lot to learn from reading the stuff that you do. So it's remarkable.
I'm glad I could help.
So to keep things short, because we do want to move along, I just sent in the chat 2 links. The first one is to Lightrun's free tier. We have a free tier you can play around with, download the product and use. Shai, in a moment, will register and kind of walk you through the flow of installing the system with IntelliJ. We have an ID plugin that you can play around with. Once Shai does that, should take about 5 to 7 minutes. Vlad will jump right into it. We are more than welcome. You are more than welcome to follow along. Please sign up, play around with us as we go along. Welcome to Guillaume Matthew. Your mic and camera are not open. Nobody's mic and camera open. The only person who can talk, well, the only people who can talk here are us. The only cameras that are open are us. Feel free to do whatever, drink, walk without a shirt, I don't know, whatever people do inside their living rooms. And please, by all means, keep the chat active. Hello, George. Hello, Harsha. Hello, Rasul. Hello, Fook. Hello, Michael. Thank you very much for joining us. Just drop wherever you're from. Let us know who you are. What do you like to do? What type of pancakes do you like? What type of coffee do you drink? Whatever, just write down anything. It's always fun to see the chat kind of live and alive. Shai, take it away. Please share your screen. Show us how to install Lightrun with the application, and let's go. Let's do it.
So we'll start by installing Lightrun, and I hope you all know IntelliJ. It looks a bit different here because it's the new UI you might have heard about quite a bit. Very cool stuff. So you're getting that as an extra bonus, but the same things still work the same way. If you open preferences, then you can go to the marketplace and look for Lightrun. And here we go. And you can just install that if that plugin. And you'll obviously need to restart the IDE for that to work. And see my kids, obviously.
Very important. Your kids are very important.
An important piece. If you skip that part, then you're missing out, obviously.
Definitely.
You also need to register at lightrun.com/free, which leads to this page. You register, you get a free account, and then you're faced with this wizard. When you look at this wizard, it says that you need to log in from the IDE. So going back here, I'm already logged in, but technically you just click on this red button and it will send you back to the login screen and log you in. And then it will enable the next button, which should lead you here to setting up the agent. And setting up the agent requires a project. So essentially you, in this case, it shows me the NPM agent for some reason.
Go back and you need to choose the Java.
Yeah, it's because I skipped the stages here instead of taking the Java agent option.
No worries. You can go back and then choose the back one.
The back, yeah. Here we go.
Yeah.
So we need to pick IntelliJ, Java, and then next. And yeah, now it's showing the correct thing. And then it shows the correct thing with the agent as well. And here you need to pick the platform. Notice that I'm running on a Mac. It supports only Intel for Mac. So if you're using an ARM Mac like mine, you will need to use an Intel JVM, which works fine. Also, if you're installing on a server, which is typically how you'd use Lightrun, you'd probably pick Linux and then use these instructions to install it on the server itself. Now, once it's installed, you're in the server, you need to, where is it? Bloody hell. As usual, there's always something that gets messed up. Here we go. So once you do that, you can go here, and this is essentially the pet clinic project that we're running. And you can just do Java agent path, the path to the location where you place the agent, and then run -jar and the path to the jar itself. And you can see that in where, you can see that here. Essentially, you run, to add the Lightrun agent, you just need to add it to the path like this. And once you do that, you can do next and be logged into Lightrun, which looks kind of sort of like this. And you can then start using Lightrun right from the IDE and from the plugin itself. as Vlad will demonstrate in his work.
Right.
I think I can go over the share and let you carry on from that.
Thank you, Shai.
All
So
right.
whoever who registered for a Lightrun account, please note that I have also sent, thank you. We also like the logo of Lightrun, Mukti. Thank you very much. Sorry, the Reem, not Mukti. We also like the logo of Lightrun. It's a cheetah. It's very cute. Whoever registered for the Lightrun account and has downloaded Vlad's project, again, I'm just going to share the links to both Lightrun's platform and Vlad's GitHub project right now over chat. If you want to follow along, feel free. That's the best way to kind of get the sense of what Vlad is doing. If not, again, no worries. We have the GitHub repo. You can play around with it, and then later on, download it and play around with it yourself. Anyways, that's it for our introduction. Vlad, take it away.
All right.
Take us.
1 second to share my screen.
Yes, go ahead.
All right. So basically, we are going to start, of course, with a presentation, because this is a presentation. So now a little bit, just to give it more of a story. So basically, we're going to use, exactly like Tom told you, we're going to use the pet cleaning application from Spring. Why? For several reasons. First of all, every time I'm asking people what framework they are using, it's almost universal that they are using Spring Boot. So this is very, very familiar for most of you. And most of the time, if you have performance reasons in your web or enterprise application that you're using, and if you happen to use Spring Boot, then that's why we chose this setup. All right, and from the start, right from the start, I would say that when using Spring Boot, and of course, it's very likely that you're also using a relational database. One of the most important things right from the very beginning when you're starting your project is to try and analyze the queries that are generated by the data access framework that you're using. If you're using the default, or let's say the most common setup, even Josh Long recently ran a survey about what people prefer to use, and JP was like 61%. So if you happen to use JPA, you have this setting. It's very familiar. You get it you get it from the documentation on Stack Overflow. You'll find it on Baeldung. You get to see this setting, which allows you to get the SQL statements that are generated by JP and Hibernate, and that's better than nothing. Not checking anything that happens. However, there's a problem with this setting, and you don't get to see it when you take a look in the application properties. When you take a look at the setting, it doesn't look wrong, but in reality, it has some problems, and one of those problems is the fact that it runs to the console. So it's basically the equivalent to printing logs, or to printing the statement using system out print line. And now comes the question: does any one of you remember why we stopped using system out print line and we switched to using logs? If you remember,
yes. Before you continue, Vlad, I don't want to stop. This was a question, meaning you can provide answers, and we can see in the chat everything you say. And please make sure to mark, there's a blue little box next to the word 2 in the chat. Please write everyone and note host and panelists, so everybody can see your answers. So Vlad, can you repeat the question, please?
Yes, so the question is, do you remember what was the reason why we actually switched to using loggers? We have now loggers. We have log4j, log4j2, logback, and slf4j. Why do we have so many options? And if you remember, in JavaScript, you have console log. You print there to that console, and that's fine. But in Java, we have the equivalent, which is system out print line, but yet we're using loggers. So in the chat, you can write, I'm going to do this small parenthesis and leave you to give you a little bit of time to answer the question, and then I'll check back to you. In the meanwhile, if you take a look,
Vlad, to be honest, there's only about 30 answers in the chat. So if you don't mind,
okay.
I'll just mention a couple of them, because
just a couple.
Some of them repeat. So there's a lot of people saying that system out print line is slow, system out print line is blocking. There's no persistence, it slows performance. JVM performance, a lot of performance. Will recordings be provided? That's not relevant, but yes, they will be provided. Different question. Yes.
It's still relevant to the log.
It's still relevant, exactly. So I guess if I had to aggregate the answers, there are 4 of them. One is performance or memory. That's the first thing.
And
the
makes
second
sense.
is the fact, sorry?
And makes sense. It's true.
That's one. The other one is that it's blocking. So IO interactions, basically. The third one is about persistence. It's not persistent. Performance, blocking, persistence, and also, again, it depends on how you do it, but it's difficult to filter, to aggregate, to analyze, and so forth. That's the 4 main answers. So what do you say, Vlad?
Well, first of all, like Shai told, yes, about the persistence part. Yes, yes, you would say that it's not persistent, but then you can redirect the output to a file, and then it's going to be persistent. So yes, in reality, you want your logs to be persistent somewhere, because then you want to aggregate. Maybe you are sending them, parsing them, and they will end up in Kibana or something like that, or some other application performance monitoring tool. Other thing is the fact that we have this abstraction indirection layer between how we emit the logs, log events, and then how we are going to persist them. And that allows us to do filtering. So you can filter based on the package. Logs are hierarchical. You can filter and then tell, for this package, I want this package to be in warning, and then for this one to be in debug or info mode. So we have this flexibility. Also, you have the flexibility of deciding where they should go to a file, rotating file, do it synchronously, like you said, asynchronously. So that's why it's a much more advanced way of writing the logs. And it's great that we have it. And the fact is, if you're using this setting here, you don't get anything from that, because that one just prints into the console. That's why I would say that it's not worth having it. So another thing is, if you take a look here, you see these question marks, and now comes the second question. What are those question marks about? I mean, what's the deal with that? You can write there on the chat, and then I'll come back to that.
When we started with Lightrun, we used JPA indeed, and in our story, and we turned on the SQL, and back then we didn't have Lightrun to debug Lightrun with. So
great.
Use that setting, and we did have issues. So when we had issues, we had a log, and then we didn't have the context for that log for a specific query. So we didn't know, oh, did it come from this request or from that request? So it was very difficult to debug because the MDC, the context for a specific log entry, wasn't transferred there. So it's really, its context is a huge part there.
And that's great. Yeah. Yes, you can do that to aggregate. You can write there some information which you can use then to group by multiple logs and then to aggregate them. And it's essential, yes, especially for microservices environment where things can be printed from different services, different JVMs. That's it's important.
The moment you have more than one user, more than one request, it's impossible to distinguish without proper MDC context. It's a game changer.
Game changer, and it's been around for I don't know, 20 years. In it's a lesser known feature, but it's important. It's important, and you have it in Log4j and Logback too. And about that thing is that those question marks that bind as placeholders or bind parameters, which actually tells you that Hibernate behind the scenes uses prepare statements, and that's great because those perform way better than plain statements. They allow you to do batching as well, which can be done automatically by Hibernate. And the thing is that, and here comes the interesting part, sometimes I get some contract and I have to figure it out why a certain system works slowly. And you would imagine that I would get access to the code. That never happens right away. And sometimes we have to do this debugging live. I'm going to show you now in this Spring Boot application how you can actually do it with this Lightrun agent. And like Tom said, you have access. This is on my GitHub account. It's a branch in this Spring Pet Clinic application. It's a dedicated branch that we are going to use throughout this presentation. And first of all,
sorry for stopping you. There's a bunch of questions of what Lightrun actually is, which is a great question. So you sign up for the show, but you don't know what it is. I'll do a tiny 3-minute explanation. I think that would kind of settle the scene for many of the folks here. I'm going to grab the screen for one moment, Vlad, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Please do so.
Okay, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to share the screen. I'm going to do that. And I really hope that this will work. No, it didn't. Okay, so Lightrun is a tool that enables you to troubleshoot your live applications. In essence, it enables you to add logs, metrics, and traces to live applications, regardless of where they're running, prod, pre-prod, staging, dev, CI, wherever, directly from the IDE or the CLI in real time and on demand. That means no redeployments, no hot fixing, nothing of that sort matters. To give you a context, usually currently when a developer wants to understand a tiny bit about what happens inside their application, they're forced to basically add logs, hotfix, or analyze an endless stream of logs in their APM. That's not nice, that's not easy, that's not fun for everyone involved. I think that this is kind of, in a sense, a pipeline, in a way, between the developer's IDE and the thing that's actually running in production or anywhere that is running live. Our intention, when we thought about it originally, our intention was to enable instead of having to analyze, like log everything and then analyze later, our approach was let's only add what we need when we need it. Almost surgically understand what is happening inside your live applications without having to redeploy, restart, add a bunch of hotfixes, or throw up your log levels to debug at every given point in time. That's it. No more pitch. I'm going to let Lightrun. I'm going to get Vlad. That's not Lightrun. I'm going to get Vlad to actually present Lightrun in live setting. Go, Vlad.
All right, so let me reshare my screen back. So that's exactly like Tom said. That's exactly what we're going to do. So first of all, let's just start. This pet clinic application. I have this run but file here. I'm going to run the application. What does this one do? It just calls. Java calls the main class and then it attaches the agent. That's it. But then let's just wait for it to attach itself, and then in the meanwhile I'm going to show. Let's assume that this is a production system. I cannot just redeploy to change the settings, but they have some use case. They know the use case and it's slow. They don't know exactly why it's slow, and we will try to figure it out now. So what we're going to do live, we can connect to this system, and we're going to add in. Hibernate has this loader class that is going to be called whenever we're going to execute some queries. And we can actually add here, we can add a Lightrun. Yes.
Before you continue, people are asking to see the screen on a live screen. I'm wondering what's happening here. Can everyone, if it's possible, is everybody seeing the screen, Vlad's screen live in a full view? If not, okay, good. Many of you do. If you don't, there's a small bar. There's a small block bar on the right-hand side of the panel next to our faces. You can toggle it right and left to open up the window so you can see it a bit larger. Okay, that's good. That's good. Also, if you want, on the right-hand side, there should be a white bar on the right-hand side of the screen. You can right-click this little arrow there, click close, and it will close it for you. It's usually where the chat resides. That's it. Sorry, go ahead. And also one other comment, Vlad, so sorry for stopping you.
Sure.
There was another person who mentioned Shai's link is not working. Instead, I'm going to drop another link for the login.
You mentioned that link is working, not mine.
Okay, that's good. And yeah, we know the URL is not writing correctly. We will fix it. I send the new URL in the chat. Vlad, take it away. Right-click, Lightrun logs with you.
All right, so we now opened this loader class, which is from Hibernate core. And now I'm going to add a log dynamically. I'm going to add a log dynamically without changing or redeploying the application right from the Java ID, from IntelliJ IDEA. So I have this context here, Lightrun, and I'm going to add log. And now I'll have to let's just do it like this: Hibernate. Because I want to know whether this is being logged from Hibernate query, and then I have placeholders. Let's write proper English. query. Okay, and now we will log this SQL statement, and not just the SQL statement, but I also want to get the parameters. And let's just wrap this into square brackets so that it's easier to see it. And params and the parameters, and I'm going to do it live. The parameters are inside this query parameters, and you can go hierarchically, you can go inside that, and we have something like named, because we're using named parameters and name parameters, and that's basically it. So I'm going to add this log here and then go here and pipe it. Now you can tell about what piping means if you want in the meanwhile, until I'm going to open the browser.
So piping is the idea that sometimes you want to see the logs together with the other logs. So when you want to debug something and you're injecting a new log, then you have existing logs, one line above, one line below, then you start reading the logs, you want to see them in order. You also want to see the logs sometimes ingested into Elastic or wherever, Datadog, wherever you place your logs when you're done with them, when you ingest them. So oftentimes you want to just send them as if it was a log that you wrote in the code when you inject it. Sometimes you don't. So for instance, if you have a large team and you're injecting a log that might be difficult because it's just, oh, this is a debug statement. You don't want everyone to see that. But if you add it into the production, then it might be a problem. So you can pipe it only to your IDE, and you will be the only person that will see it. It won't go into the ingestion. It won't go anywhere else. So you can pick either do it in the app, which will get the ingestion, work as if you wrote it in the code, put it in the plugin, so only you will see it, or both, so which is a common convenience.
So I'm getting a couple of questions here. First of all, how to connect to the remote process, and Vlad, I'll let you take this in a moment. How to connect to the remote process. Lightrun is a 3-tier system. What you're seeing is not the IDE connect directly to the application. There's an intermediary server in the middle, the Lightrun management server. Shai showed it to you when you registered for this for the service. This is a piece of software that can either run with you, like in your site, your Kubernetes clusters or your own bare instances, or we can host it for you, which means that the IDE connects to that. The agent long polls this management server continuously and then gets the state back. So there's no direct connection. There's no remote. It's not RPC, basically. It's not remote and not a remote process execution as well. What is the performance overhead of this? This is capped and throttled. Basically, we check that every instruction that we instrument and add does not bypass a specific kind of same defaults. I can tell you that every invocation is around the 100 microsecond range-ish. That's how much time it takes us to instrument a log or a metric or a snapshot, which you will see in a moment. And again, I'm so sorry, Vlad, go. I'm done.
No problem.
So now about security, which is related there. Everything is in a sandbox, which also throttles, but also keeps everything read-only and secure. So there's that. There's other security measurements, but Vlad, we'll talk about it later.
Yeah. So let's assume that this was this is the place where the problem was. So searching the owner. So let's just search for Rodriguez or something like that, and we're going to find this executes the query, of course, in our production system. And now we go back here, and we will see the query that was executed. So this was the query. It's Hibernate query. I get the query and I get the params. You can see there the params, last name, and what I was searching for. And that's nice because actually I get to see the query, even if without redeploying, I get to see exactly the query that I'm interested in dynamically. And that's a feature that's it's nice having. I think maybe I misspell for the parameters. That's why I didn't see it properly. Query parameters, or maybe I could check it by using a snapshot, but it's not as relevant. The thing is that what is important is that you can get these logs printed for you. You can print almost anything, only variable that you get that you have from here, and that's nice because most of the performance problems that people have usually are in production, because that's where you have a large volume of data. You don't get to typically emulate those performance problems in your development environment where you have just a very small amount of data, and the database there is just a couple of pages that fits in memory anyway. And that's why it's important to use and do these things without, of course, I cannot just do a debugging. You know, if I do a debugging production, I'm just going to halt the entire server and nobody can do anything. No one would ever want to do that. That's not debugging. Basically, it's just an agent that prints what we are interested in. Now here we can actually go here, see exactly what was not right with this. It was query parameters. Okay, let me see. So let's copy paste it from here to be sure. And inside we had something like named parameters. That was what we were interested in. Let me try to rerun it again.
So while Vlad is running it again, Vlad just talked about our day microcleaning, very funny. If we are running multiple nodes and we want to choose particular version of nodes, is it possible? So if the node is running, then on the right-hand side on Vlad's screen, next to where it says agents, all of these versions will be deployed. If you have multiple replicas of the same service, it will appear there and you can connect to wherever the agent is running. And this is because the agents are constantly long polling the server, telling them that they exist. The discovery mechanism is there.
You can also group them with tags. That's the important.
We can also group them with tags, which is the line up there that says production. Basically, you can group similar replicas or similar instances under the same tag, and then basically connect or add the logs, metrics, snapshots to wherever you want. Also, we talked earlier about performance capping. If you note the second line in the Lightrun console, breakpoint ID, log point is paused due to high CPU overhead until log quota is restored. This is our sandbox in action. If we try to instrument an instruction, a JVM instruction that is not performant, it takes too much resources, Lightrun will block itself for performing, never hurting the performance of your application. So yes, there is a bit of overhead when adding instructions. We are doing bytecode manipulation after all, but it is kept and throttled live. We interpret every single instruction we instrument. Take it away, Vlad.
All right, so you can see here in this line, you can see the query and then add params, and I get to see last name and Davies. So I went inside knowing how, and that's great because you already have the Hibernate source code. You can go inside, you already have the source code. You can easily figure out what exactly you should log or what exactly you should introspect. So that was about and that's real. Actually, I had to do this kind of introspection, try to figure out. There was one time when I helped, it was a multi-million-dollar project that was in bad shape, and we had to, I had no access to the code. Yet I found a solution. So you can imagine, you know, it's not like in the movies where you have access to the code. In reality, it's much more difficult than that. And that was related to logging. And that was just so we can warm up a little bit. Now, another thing which is interesting, I'm not sure if you know about it. It's still about Spring. Spring has it. Spring Boot has it. If you're using these popular frameworks, then you should know about how connections are actually retrieved. When are the connection retrieved? And this is a very interesting thing. You know that you have your services, you have your transactional annotation, and inside that transactional annotation, you may wonder when the connection is fetched. The connection is fetched from the connection connection pool, like from Hikari, and ideally you should fetch it as lazily as possible, like at the moment when you want to execute a query, or if there was no query, you only persisted merge data at the moment when you want to flush, before commit, when the entity manager is being flushed. And the thing is that by default, what Spring does, it basically starts the JPA transaction, and that JPA transaction and Hibernate has to do something about it, because in JDBC, the connection is on auto commit by default. And the very fact that we're in a transactional service and we call repositories, we cannot work in auto commit mode. We want to make sure that all those statements happen in the context of the same transaction. So the auto commit mode has to be disabled if it's enabled. But in order to check whether the auto commit flag is enabled, you need the connection, meaning that the connection is acquired eagerly right from the very beginning, and that can be problematic. Think about it. You're entering your first service, and then you're calling a microservice, and that takes 500 milliseconds. It means that you hold on to database connection for 500 milliseconds even before you wanted to do any query. And the more everyone does that, the more you are depriving others from using the connections, and that can affect performance, and that can create bottlenecks and can affect the way you are scaling. So how can you tell that, for instance, in your application, whether that happens or not? And for that, we can use this abstract logical that is going to be called that's what it's going to be called, and that's what actually behind the scenes Spring is going to call is this abstract logical connection implementation, this begin method. And here, if this check is being done, if it Hibernate disables the auto-commit flag, we can basically add here, there are two things. You can either add, we can add a log, we can add a snapshot to this, but basically we can just add a log. So let's actually, we can remove the other log I had previously, this one here. I can remove this, and I can clear that. Actually, I can clear the entire console that I had before. And here I'm going to add a log telling that Hibernate acquired the connection eagerly. And I don't want that. I don't want this situation to happen. And I also want to see exactly when that connection is being acquired. And for that, I know that that happens, one second, that happens in the data source connection provider. In Hibernate, whenever it gets a connection for a Spring Boot application, this is where this is where the connection is going to be get. And I'm going to add here another log, db connection acquired. All right, so now I have these two logs that I'm going to add. And now let's go back to our use case. Let's go back to this application and just find something here. Go back to the code.
Well, before you continue, I want to mention something that might be not very apparent. Yes, Samir, Lightrun is free to use. We'll talk, Kuntal will talk in a moment about how to put the log in production. Also, I saw the Graal VM answers. We currently do not support Graal VRs. Can we work with remote processes? Not at this current moment. Well, sorry. To the contrary, we work almost exclusively with remote processes where they run in staging, production, in live, in CI. We work pretty much everywhere your runtime can run. But to stop and kind of mention something that might not be apparent here, Lightrun is a real-time debugging tool, a real-time instrumentation tool. We'll do everything live, which means that the application is running constantly in the background. That is almost counter to the normal flow of debugging using a debugger, where you stop and step in and step out of the application while you're stopping it. That means that every time that Vlad is doing something, he needs to instrument, or rather invoke, the correct path where that application is running. So I don't know if you noticed, but what Vlad is doing is he's adding a piece of code that persists in the environment. And once not a piece of code, sorry, a piece of telemetry, a log, a metric, a trace, a snapshot, he's adding these pieces of logs, and then once he's done adding them, he goes and invokes that path in the application. In this case, it's usually using the find owners button inside the Spring Path Plane. He's calling the API endpoint consistently in order to invoke those logs that are stored in the IDE. And again, a person here, Samir, asked whether it's free to use. Yes, it's free to use. And one extra question, because it's really interesting, how to roll back all instrumentation once we are done. Every single Lightrun metric is ephemeral, nothing persists. When you're done with it, it will die by itself. The logs have a lifetime of 1 hour by default, configurable completely from the IDE. And you can then decide whether you want to kind of see it for a bit longer or just have it die away and it will stop emitting. No need for rollbacks at all. One of the pure pleasures of doing real-time instrumentation instead of hot fixing.
Vlad, can you scroll down a bit in the side panel so we'll see the agents? I think once people see the agents and the actions here, this will be clear. This is literally a server that we're seeing there that's running on Vlad's machine, but technically it could be any server anywhere in the cloud. Usually you don't necessarily want this locally. And you could have 1,000 of these right here and use the tags above to classify them and place logs on multiple servers at once. and get information from multiple places.
So
it's a very cool technology.
Yeah.
In short, so if you take a look what we've done here, so it ran, and if I get to look in the console, the DB connection was acquired. Yes, of course. And then I get this log because this log was to disable the auto commit flag. So let's say that I was supposed to investigate a problem related to the DB connection. I'm just adding that right from the start. I know, okay, so that's happening. So how we can fix it? We go to the application properties file where we're going to configure, and basically what you should do in your even in your application, what you should do if you're using Hikari, there's one thing that you want to do right from the start: disable the auto commit flag by default. You don't have to. This is not like you are running pgadmin. You want it to be disabled for this Spring Boot application. Always you want to have it disabled. And then there's something else. You need to tell Hibernate that you took care of that, because otherwise Hibernate cannot know. So with this property that I added myself when I was working for Hibernate, you can tell Hibernate that this has been taken care of. And of course, now we just have to restart our application here because we changed the property. So we are going to run this script again to restart the application to have the new settings in place. And we are also going to clear the log, and then we will just run again. Just run the Springplet Clinic application. Just see exactly what if we get that eagerly loaded log again. So that's basically what there are all sorts of things that you might not know, you might not have access to the code, but you can introspect. And this is just for demonstration. You can actually apply the same patterns to almost any other use case that you might have. So probably this one has starting in the meanwhile. Yes. And now let's go here, do the same things we did before, find the owners, find some owners, or maybe all the owners that we had. And let's go here in the Lightrun console. And basically, we shouldn't see the one that was acquired. Maybe I should have piped it. I'm not sure I did that before. So let me play a little bit more with this. Davis, find. If it's pipeline, maybe I should also see it in the application in the terminal. If it's not, otherwise I'm going to. Maybe I think it's got disabled. So I should re-edit here because I stopped it. So I'm going to edit again. DB connection was fetched. And here, I'm going to add another log telling that auto commit was disabled. That's the kind of log that now we don't want to see. And let's
so the nice thing about this, Vlad, is what you're basically doing is you're doing printf debugging live. That's
exactly like that.
I would just place logs wherever and try to figure out which path the application has took in order to understand the logic, kind of the logical constraints of what's happening. And you're doing that exactly just without the logging and without the restarting and without the recompiling, right? That's basically it.
So that was basically with that. Now, another things, actually, there are so many things that I have to show you here. And one of the next thing that it implies it uses a snapshot, and that's even more interesting than just logging. And for that, I prepare some example for you, which is actually very relevant. Now, whenever you are executing a JPQL or criteria API query, it's very easy. You even create them using JPQL. And whenever you are doing so, basically JPQL is simply a string. So Hibernate has to take that string, and based on the grammar, it has to construct an abstract syntax tree that it traverses and it generates the SQL query, which has to be executed on the database. And of course, that takes time. It takes time, and for that it has a cache. Hibernate has an internal cache, which by default is set to 2048 entries. And why it's important to configure it properly is because the difference between a cache hit and a cache miss is this. So it's so much faster to get it from the cache instead of always compile it and traverse it and generate that statement. You can drive a parallel between exactly what the database does. You send a SQL string to the database, which has to be parsed, and an execution plan should be generated. And of course, if you're using Oracle or SQL Server, if you have a cache hit and you don't have to do that, you get it from the cache, it's so much faster than having to parse it on and on and on the way that Postgres or MySQL does. So how we can actually introspect that? Well, we can actually, in this case, let's remove those. We don't need those anymore. We can use the statistic class. In fact, this statistic Hibernate has this statistic utility, which you can use for cache hits, for cache misses if you want, or in our case, we can even add here. We're going to add this snapshot. We're going to add a snapshot where we're going to capture all the context of what is being sent to this method, because I want to see exactly what exactly is being compiled, and what queries are being compiled, and how long it takes for those to get compiled. And let's pipe it. And now I played a little bit with this application, so some of the queries have been already compiled, but let's see, let's go to some other places which I haven't, since I started the application, I didn't check, or maybe here, maybe I can do something, add a new pet or something like that. Let's see. Okay, so now let's check. Okay, so it compiled one of the queries, and I get here, this was captured at runtime. Yes.
Before you continue, I think it's important to understand what's going on here. So what you basically did is you took a breakpoint. That's what you did. You took a breakpoint. That breakpoint did not break the application. It's basically a non-breaking breakpoint. And the important thing about what just happened here is that you can see the full stack trace and the frames and the relevant variables, the relevant arrays, and basically understand everything that's happening inside that application. And there was just a few questions asked that I really want to kind of explain. Somebody asked whether there's anything else except for the injecting logger. This snapshot feature, not the virtual breakpoint feature, is one of our best used features. Everybody loves it. It also can be invoked conditionally, like the logs can. Sorry, what did you say?
You said conditional just when I wanted to.
Yes. So yes, it can be invoked conditionally as well, which is pretty cool. And also it can be invoked multiple times. So if Vlad hits the API more and more and more and more, we can automatically capture a bunch of snapshots one after the other to almost enable you to diff between the status of different API requests, which is very useful for debugging. But Vlad, please continue.
Yes. So
just sorry,
exactly like you said, it didn't stop. We actually used the application, didn't stop anything. And because it was, you know, when I went to the vets, that was the path I didn't tried before since I started the server. So Hibernate had to compile it, and you see it took 1.2 milliseconds. Now you can imagine on a very large system, maybe that default setting, maybe you haven't even actually thought of this before, but on a very large system, this is definitely not enough. And why do some extra overhead when you can just basically raise it? And you can actually have those breakpoints, a snapshot being taken on large system. You play with the application, and then, you know, if you get to see a lot of plan cache, a lot of plans being compiled, that's a good indication.
That I sometimes see is that when we're in production and a specific user complains about a problem, and he might be doing something that's a bit intensive and isn't typical. So, oh, user X has a problem, but no one else has it. So you can place a snapshot and put a condition so it will only hit when that specific user reaches that specific method. And then you'll get the actual data, the full stack trace, all the variables. And you can finally find that, oh, well, he's querying with this data and it's invoking that table, which I didn't optimize. I don't have an index for that. Oh, that's why he's getting that performance problem. Other users don't hit that because they don't have that same constraint. And that's the really valuable thing, where you don't necessarily know what to log. You don't even know the question, and you can specify and hit it the exact amount of details that you need.
Exactly. So that's it's indeed very and very flexible. You could do that.
Surgical.
Yes. And now other things, there are many things you can detect. For instance, you're using JP and Hibernate, and one of the worst decisions that was taken in JP was to make this many-to-one, the default strategy for many-to-one and one-to-one, to make it fetch type eager, because that's opening the door for n+1 query issues, and whenever you are having an n+1 query issue, is basically because secondary queries are generated. And how you can determine, let's say that I now have to introspect this system that works slowly. Most of the time when it works slowly, one of the very first thing that I check whether there are secondary queries that are executed. That's a good indication that either fetch type eager was being misused. They used it, maybe they didn't even know that they had to disable it. They should have make it fetch type lazy, or maybe they use fetch type lazy, but as we will see next, they don't use join fetch as they should. So how we can do that? Actually, we go back to our application here. We're going to remove this because we don't need it anymore. And now we are going to load something else. We're going to load the default load event listener. This default load event listener, it's basically, this one here is basically the place, whenever you're loading something, you're calling find, or the association is being loaded using a secondary query, a load event is generated and is triggered by this. And in load from data source is how a query is being generated, and we get here. So what we want to do here, and I'm going to show you that you can add here a snapshot, and want to add a snapshot here, but only if the event is association fetch. Only in this case, because when that one is true, it means it's a secondary query. So I'm going to add this one here, this snapshot. It's a conditional snapshot. And I'm going back to the application, and I'm going here, finding owner, going here as well, playing a little bit with it, and then going back here. And we already found something was happening. So we load from the data source. What exactly? We're loading this pet type. And that's a good indication. We go to the pet, where is going, this pet entity that was loaded has this many-to-one, which by default is eager, and that's why it generated and it loaded this on demand. So you can determine, you can actually find it right away what was the problem. This is the entity that was generated, and we get to see it also from the context why exactly it wanted to load this entity here as well. And that can happen for eager associations. It can also happen for lazy, even if you make it lazy association, but you don't fetch it. You basically don't fetch it on demand. So if this association is lazy and you load the entity, it just issues a single query for this post comment. And for this post many-to-one association, only the foreign key column is fetched and a proxy is being used. But if you access the proxy, a secondary query is issued. You say that that's the goal of lazy loading. Yes, the goal of lazy loading is to avoid loading something when you don't need it. But if you need it, it's much better that instead of find, you issue a query. You issue a query using join fetch, and you can find those issues as well using the same snapshot there. And another thing which I left this at the end, because unfortunately in the Spring Boot, if you have a Spring Boot application, this anti-pattern is enabled by default. And in fact, you have to disable it explicitly. It's an anti-pattern. I'm going to explain why. Because this one tries to initialize. It tries to force the initialization of uninitialized proxies even outside of the context of the entity manager, the context that loaded that proxy. So how is it? So it looks like some people call it pattern, but it's not. It's an anti-pattern. Why? Because this one uses a web filter to create and open a session or an entity manager. Think about it. You have something in the web that does something that is the responsibility of the data access layer. Right from the start, that's a red flag. Why do you do that? That's not okay. But at this moment, this entity manager is not attached to a database connection. It's like a map. And then the request goes on to the dispatch servlet. It goes to the controller, MVC controller, and now it calls a service. That's transactional. That one is going to be attached to a database connection. So the very same session you opened before is going to be attached to a connection. It's going to be run in a database transaction. Everything that you are going to fetch here, do here, happens in the context of that database transaction. But then you go out to the controller, and then you have to send a JSON back to the view. And then you have some proxies, uninitialized proxies. Because the session, the entity manager, is still open, the proxy is going to be initialized. But what connection is going to be used? Because the connection was closed here. And now comes the part in JPA allows you to load data even outside of a transactional context, only to load data, not to do any modification. And the problem is that every proxy that gets initialized is initialized using a new query. That means you have to fetch a new connection, do a query, release that connection. Get a new proxy, do the same. N+1 for queries, issues, and of course, you put a lot of pressure on the connection pool. And basically, how you can determine, how you can find if that happens, basically, you can add a new snapshot in the same way. We can basically go to the default initialize. Let me see if I have it here already. Default initialize connection event listener here, and on this uninitialized connection we are going to add here a snapshot. We're going to add this snapshot here. Let's make the pipe, and now we're going to play a little bit with the application. Let's make sure that we don't have any snapshot, and yeah.
Hello, Camtasia.
Yes, it's just I shouldn't have clicked it, but hello, Camtasia. Okay, so now we're playing a little bit with the application. And because of that, because you have open session, actually, I think I should do something else in order to trigger, because, you know, in this Spring
Before
Pad,
we continue, Vlad, sorry for stopping you. It's about 2 minutes to the hour. We are going to go a bit. We are going to go a bit over. It's okay. As we mentioned, we're going to go about 5 or 10 minutes over. I hope the Zoom webinars will not block us. Everything here will be sent to you. The recording, the questions, everything will be sent to you later. Also, we had a small demo, Shai and I wanted to demonstrate. We'll skip it for today, but hopefully we'll have Vlad again. Everybody who needs to drop by the hour, thank you so much for joining us. We will continue a bit over, so feel free to stay. But if you need to drop, that's perfectly fine. The recording will be sent to you. Vlad, please continue.
Okay, so I'm sorry that I ran so slowly.
Never be sorry. Never be sorry.
Yes, never be sorry. So actually, the way that Pet Clinic is designed, everything is fetch type rigor, which is basically against any best practice. So basically, we're going to fix it a little bit here. So we're going to make this fetch type lazy as we should. Now, of course, we changed the code, so we have to stop the server, and we also want to compile. Of course, we're skipping the test like any good developer does. And I'm kidding, but actually we don't have time. We have some weird issues here. We don't know it.
You're absolutely correct. Every good developer skips tests. That's fine. Don't let everybody think otherwise. Even excellent programmers like yourself skip tests. That's fine.
Well, actually, I don't. But
look at you.
So apparently, Spring Boot Clinic wants us to do that. We don't know exactly why we do that, but it seems to be some, we don't remember exactly who added it, but it seems to fix any problem there. So we actually compiled the test. We actually applied the formatting. Let's recompile it again. So now we're recompiling in order to get this lazy. We want to have these associations to be lazy, but the problem is that by default, Spring Boot has this open session in view, and what we want to do, we want to catch if that's the case, because it will generate other issues for us. So we're going to run again that, and let's see if we have this. Let's see if that was persisted or not. So here I'm going to add this snapshot. In the meanwhile, let's remove anything that was before. So we have this snapshot, we do pipe. Let's see if the server started. It started, and now we're going to run home, find owners, find something here, go play a little bit with this, and go back here to the snapshot. And we can see that it was called. Why? Because we have this open session view enabled. And what you have to do, you have to go, in order to disable this one, you will have to do that. That's very important. If you start a project, do that from the very beginning. Don't leave it. If you leave it, this one and the developer application, relying on it is going to be so much harder to disable it later. All right, so that's basically what I had to show to you. I'm going, Tom also wanted to show something, and Shai as well. So I think that I'm going to pass you so that you can demo, so that you can demo.
So again, I don't think we have too much time left to demo. Shai, I think we might just do
questions, a couple of questions, maybe I should answer.
Yeah,
okay,
so
yeah, sure.
We'll do a bit of question answering. Shai, do you want to answer, or should I take the questions?
I can take the first, at least. I see right here. The instrumentation and manipulation happens via a server. Given that I do not have the instrumentation server myself, what amount of data is being transmitted? Is the data secured, encrypted in any way? Great question. Actually, you do have the server, because the portion that does the instrumentation is the agent, the portion that runs on your server, not on Lightrun's server. The Lightrun server is only a management server, and the reason it's there is because normally you don't want production to be exposed anywhere, not even for the developers within your organization. You wanted everything to be very secure. That's part of why JDWP is very insecure. So when you connect to the Lightrun server, and your production can be hidden and segregated completely. The Lightrun server doesn't connect to your servers either. They connect to it. So the way it works, your server, the Lightrun server is sort of oblivious to your agents until they actually connect to it and submit data to it and ask it for responses. That's super secure in that sense. They transmit data. Yes, it is encrypted, the data from your logs, from your breakpoints, if you do the piping. Some organizations, for instance, don't do piping at all because of security concerns. Others do it. There's lots of regulations and questions about that, but technically we've went through all the security processes up the wazoo in that sense, and it's safe for banks and Fortune 500, Fortune 10 probably. So in that sense, it's very secure and well encrypted all the way through.
So, sorry, go ahead, Shai.
You have something to add to that?
So I think that regardless of kind of the full enterprise stuff that we can say, the SOC 2, the ISO 27001, all the kind of the enterprise PII reduction stuff that we do, one core thing that I think kind of calms down, or at least kind of makes sense to a lot of developers who are not used to working in a production setting, is that the sandbox interprets every Lightrun instruction and then checks whether it's read-only. So we look at instructions on the JVM level and check whether they are read or they are a write. We actually review every one of them and check whether they have any side effects. If they have side effects, we're very eager on blocking them. And I can tell you, I've been here from quite early days of the company. I've seen this being interpreted very well. I've seen this interpreter being built over time. We're very eager. So we will almost block you on purpose
If we don't know, it's dead.
Exactly. If we're not sure, we'll block you on purpose instead of.
This is true for performance too. So if you use too many classes or something like that, gone.
Right.
And so it's meant for simple operations to get variable values, method invocations that are simple. But if you start doing anything complex, no. So the next question here is about logs. They're aged after an hour. So that's one of the things I wanted to demonstrate. You can place a snapshot and then go into the advanced query and then set it to be like 100 hours and then go home, go to sleep. And the nice thing is you can also type things into Slack and things like that. And one of the demos that I intended to show is exactly that. You place a snapshot, you go home, you go on vacation, you come back and you get a notice in Slack that you got the snapshot was hit or the log was hit. And that's super valuable if you have a problem that only happens once in a while for a user that logs into your system once a week. You can place that. And these things that are impossible to chase, that you need to sort of how do you reproduce that thing that happens once in a blue moon? This is exactly it. So it's great, that thing, that long running breakpoint.
Excellent. One last question. There's actually a couple more questions, so we're going to take them, but we are totally over the hour, so I'd like to not keep you on for too long. But there are many questions, so I'm going to allow myself to go up to the 15-minute mark, but then we're really going to cut it because again, it's not fair to the people who weren't here. Shai, I'm going to take the next two, then you'll take the next two. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. Is IntelliJ IDEA the only way to add breakpoints or logging, or how is debugging with Lightrun done in production? Debugging in production with Lightrun is actually done via IntelliJ IDEA. Basically, when you run your application in production, you don't have to run it locally. It runs in production. It works exactly the same because of this conceptualization of the platform. Basically, the way we do the networking between the entire platform. And I want to see if I have a small infrastructure slide. I usually do. I'm very good at infrastructure stuff.
Also mentioned that we also support VS Code and command line. So
yeah, so we do support a bunch of clients. We have VS Code, PyCharm for Python. We actually support 4 different runtimes, 3 different runtimes, the JVM, V8, so Node.js, and Python. JVM, we support the full range of JVM languages, Java, Scala, Kotlin. If we really try hard, we can also support Clojure. Nobody has asked so far, but when somebody asks, we'll definitely support it. In addition, in JavaScript, full TypeScript support, Node V10 and above, Python 2, 3, CPython. We got a bunch of things we can support. One extra thing while I'm here, is there any case where eager loading should be configured always for one-to-many or many-to-many or many-to-one relations? I always configure lazy loading for above relations. Is that okay? Vlad, I think that's a question for you.
That's it. The short answer, no. The long answer, no. Yes. So basically, I can tell you this. I can share. I started using Hibernate in 2004, right? So it's been 18 years. It was actually an Hibernate. And I even developed it. Never in these 18 years, I found a single use case where someone said this to Igor, that's a great idea. It never was. In fact, I can share you horror stories related to that Igor. I can share you stories where there were like 17, 18 associations that were eager, causing a lot of problems in SQL Server because there were so many joins there, and the execution, the optimizer was having a very hard time generating the execution plan. That was a problem. Or problems related to lots of queries, Cartesian products that were generated by mistake because of that eager loading. So no, actually I haven't found one. And the thing, one more story is the fact that those were lazy by default in Hibernate 3, and then JPA came. JPA has an expert group which required voting. Hibernate voted everything should be lazy. It was the others voted differently. That's what we have. That was in 2006. The ship has sailed a long time ago. We have to live with that.
It's a very good answer. And I have 2 more. Shai, you had something to say? Yeah,
there's an important question about air-gapped and on-prem. So Lightrun can be installed on-prem and with an air-gapped system. Normally you'd get a Docker deployment, although I think we're moving to Kubernetes, but technically part of the services that we help with the install and the whole thing. So it's part of the offering in general. So we have people that do that.
That's true. One extra thing that I saw on the question was, can Lightrun be used for performance testing? So again, unfortunately, we don't have enough time to properly demo the thing. I do want to close. The discussion here. Lightrun has a set of metrics that you can add to applications. Method durations, counter, how many times the line count was how many times the line was reached. TikToks, which is basically kind of a long, take an arbitrary length piece of code and check how much time it took to run. We have a bunch of performance testing as well. If you guys would like to see, if you all would like to see a performance testing workshop using Lightrun as well, just with metrics, there's a webinar that I ran about not that long ago. I'm going to drop the link over at the chat. It basically shows how to debug performance issues inside Spring Pet Clinic using Lightrun. You can check it out here. And hint for next session, plan for 90 minutes, takes the pressure away. True, thank you very much. That's
next time it's an 8-hour hackathon.
Exactly. Next time, just an 8-hour hackathon.
About the metrics, I'd like to couple of things just to clarify.
Sure.
You can pipe everything to Grafana like we intended to show in the demo here. And the second thing is the difference between that and APMs and stuff like that, which shows lots of very general high-level graphs, is this is very much like getting system current time millis and printing out the result a few lines later. That it's very, very fine-grained, very surgical. And that's the point of Lightrun versus, you know, an APM, which is more wide and more general. So that's minor thing.
That's a very good comment. And with this, my friends, we are gonna call it quits. I have a very, very high regard for Vlad. Vlad and I have been talking together, working together for a while now.
The pleasure is all mine.
Yes, it is really all yours. No, I'm kidding. It's really all ours.
All mine, all mine.
We definitely have to do this again, Vlad. I really enjoyed this. Shai, I really enjoyed you too. Your interjections are amazing. Please interject more. Just interject away all the time. If you
can check us out in our upcoming podcast.
Exactly. We are thinking about running a new podcast called Devrel After Dark, where Shai and I basically talk about anything and nothing just together, interjecting one another.
Lightrun Radio.
Lightrun Radio, exactly. Lightrun Radio, Devrel After Dark.
It's more like, you know, us being kind of jerks to one another. That's the main theme behind it.
That's very true. And we'll have Vlad as a guest. Well, Vlad roasts us after we roast each other. That will basically be the communication between us.
Yes. Get your roasted.
Again, Indeed. Two more things before we continue. Three more things actually. First of all, the recording and all the relevant information will be sent to you via email tomorrow. That's the first thing. Second of all, if you haven't done so already, we have a free tier. You can do whatever Vlad did on your own computer using lightrun.com/free. In addition, we will send you the GitHub link that Vlad uses so you can use the exact same project and follow along if you want to do this at home. And the third thing, and I think more important than anything else, performance testing is hard. It's a difficult problem. It's difficult to get it right. And if you're not sure how to do it and you have more questions and more ideas and more things you'd like us to explore, our Twitters, Tom Granot @TomGranot, Shai's Twitter, which is Debug Agent, and Vlad's Twitter, which is @VladMichalka. Tweet at us. Let us know what you think. We want to hear if you want to hear about more stuff. We'll get it for you. We'll bring you all the goods. Thank you so much for being with us for this time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to Vlad. Thank you to Shai. Have a great rest of your evening or day or wherever you are in the world. And may we meet each other again very, very soon. Goodbye. Bye-bye.
Goodbye, everyone. Thanks for participating.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.